I met Nancy during our sophomore year of college. We were both part of the campus environmental club, and I was immediately drawn to her passion for sustainability and her infectious laugh. I remember the first time we really talked. We were planting trees for an Earth Day event, and she had a smudge of dirt on her cheek. I pointed it out, and she just laughed and smeared more dirt on her face, saying she was one with nature now. That carefree spirit was what made me fall for her. We started dating a few months later, and things moved quickly. Nancy was my first serious girlfriend, and I was head over heels. We'd spend hours talking about our dreams for the future, how we wanted to travel the world, maybe join the Peace Corps together, and eventually settle down in a small, eco-friendly house. Nancy had just gotten out of a long-term relationship when we met. She dated a guy named Edward all through high school and their first year of college. From what she told me, it had been intense but tumultuous. They broke up when Edward cheated on her with a girl in his dorm. Nancy was heartbroken, and that's partly why she threw herself into environmental activism, as a way to channel her pain into something positive. I knew Nancy was still hurting when we got together, but I thought I could be the one to help her heal. I made it my mission to show her what a loving, faithful relationship could be like. Looking back, maybe I was naive. Fast forward 12 years. Nancy and I have been married for 10, living in the suburbs with our rescue dog, Luna. We both work for environmental nonprofits, not quite the Peace Corps, but still following our passion. Life has been good, or so I thought. Last month, I was going through some old boxes in our attic, looking for my college diploma for a job application. I came across a photo album from our early dating days. Flipping through it brought back so many memories. Our first road trip to a national park, late nights studying, and not studying, in my dorm room, the music festival where I first told Nancy I loved her. But then I saw a photo that made me pause. It was from a party about 3 months into our relationship. Nancy looked upset in the picture, and I had my arm around her, clearly trying to comfort her. I couldn't remember what had happened, so I brought the album downstairs to ask Nancy about it. When I showed her the photo, Nancy's face went pale. She stammered something about not remembering, but I could tell she was lying. I pressed her, asking what really happened that night. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Nancy burst into tears and told me something that shook me to my core. The night of that party, Nancy had run into Edward. They'd gotten to talking, one thing led to another, and they ended up sleeping together. Nancy swore it was a one-time thing, that she regretted it immediately and ended things with Edward for good after that. But the fact remains, she cheated on me, and then kept it a secret for 12 years. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All those years, all those anniversaries we'd celebrated, were based on a lie. I thought back to all the times we'd talked about our past relationships, how Nancy had always maintained that Edward was ancient history. How many times had she looked me in the eye and lied? In the days that followed, I was a wreck. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd catch myself staring at Nancy, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with this person who could betray me so deeply. Nancy was beside herself with guilt, constantly apologizing and swearing that nothing like that had ever happened again. But the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. If Nancy could lie about this for so long, what else might she be hiding? I started obsessing over every business trip, every girls' night out, every time she was late coming home from work. Had there been other men? Other betrayals? I confronted Nancy with my suspicions, demanding to know if there was anything else she needed to tell me. She hesitated, and my heart sank. There was more. Nancy admitted that around the same time she slept with Edward, she had also kissed another guy at a party. She swore it was just a drunken mistake, that it didn't go any further than that, but by this point, I didn't know what to believe anymore. I found myself revisiting every moment of our relationship, wondering what was real and what was a lie. I thought about the necklace I'd given Nancy for our first anniversary, a little silver tree to represent the day we met. She'd cried when I gave it to her, saying it was the most thoughtful gift she'd ever received. Now I wondered if those tears were from guilt rather than joy. The worst part was realizing how easily Nancy had been able to lie to me all these years. We'd built a life together, shared our deepest secrets, or so I thought, planned for our future, and all that time, she'd been carrying this secret. How could I ever trust her again? Nancy begged me to forgive her, saying she was young and confused back then, that she'd spent years regretting her mistake. She swore she'd been faithful ever since, that she truly loved me and had committed herself fully to our relationship. But her words felt hollow in the face of such a long-standing deception. I found myself pulling away from Nancy, unable to be close to her physically or emotionally. The thought of her with Edward kept playing in my mind like a horror movie I couldn't turn off. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, from dreams of Nancy leaving me for Edward. Our friends started to notice something was off. We'd always been the couple that everyone else looked up to, the high school sweethearts who made it work. Now we were barely speaking to each other at social gatherings. I made excuses about stress at work, not ready to share the truth. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to believe that we could work through this. We had built a life together, our little eco-friendly house that we'd spent years making as sustainable as possible, our shared dream of eventually starting an animal sanctuary. Could I really throw all that away? But another part of me wondered if I could ever truly trust Nancy again. The foundation of our relationship felt irreparably damaged. Every time Nancy told me she loved me, I found myself questioning if it was true. Was I just a safe option for her? Had she settled for me because Edward didn't want a serious relationship? I thought about the life I'd lived for the past 12 years, blissfully unaware of Nancy's betrayal. How many moments had been tainted by this secret? Our wedding day, when Nancy vowed to be faithful to me, had she thought about Edward then? When we bought our first house together, was she imagining a life with someone else? The uncertainty was eating me alive. I'd always prided myself on being a rational, level-headed person, but now I found myself consumed by jealousy and doubt. I'd catch myself scrolling through Nancy's old Facebook photos, looking for any sign of Edward. I even drove by his old house one day, half expecting, hoping, fearing, to see Nancy's car parked outside. I knew this couldn't go on. Something had to change, but I didn't know what. The thought of leaving Nancy was terrifying. She'd been my entire adult life. But staying in this limbo of mistrust and resentment wasn't sustainable either. As I write this, I'm sitting in our spare room, where I've been sleeping for the past week. Nancy is downstairs, probably crying again. I can hear her moving around, but I can't bring myself to go to her. I'm lost and don't know what to do next. Has anyone been through something similar? How do you rebuild trust after such a long-standing lie? Is it even possible? Any advice would be appreciated. Update 1. It's been a month since my last post, and I wanted to give an update on my situation. Things have been complicated, to say the least. After my initial post, I decided I needed some time away from Nancy to clear my head. I packed a bag and went to stay with my older brother, Mark, for a week. Mark and I have always been close, and he was the only person I felt I could confide in about what was happening. Mark was furious when I told him about Nancy's infidelity. He never really liked Nancy, always saying she seemed flighty and unreliable. I had chalked it up to brotherly protectiveness, but now I wondered if he had seen something in her that I had been blind to. During my week at Mark's, I did a lot of soul-searching. I thought back to the early days of my relationship with Nancy, trying to see if there were any red flags I had missed. I remembered how Nancy would sometimes get quiet and distant when we ran into people from her past. At the time, I had attributed it to her introverted nature, but now I wondered if there was more to it. I also thought about Edward, the ex-boyfriend I had never met, but who now loomed large in my mind. Nancy had always described their relationship as intense but toxic. She told me stories about Edward's jealousy, how he would accuse her of flirting with other guys and start huge fights. I had felt sorry for Nancy, proud that I could offer her a more stable, trusting relationship. The irony of that thought now was not lost on me. When I returned home after the week away, Nancy and I had a long, intense conversation. I told her how deeply her betrayal had hurt me, not just the act itself, but the years of deception that followed. Nancy cried and apologized profusely, swearing again that nothing like that had ever happened since. I decided to give our marriage a chance, but I made it clear that things needed to change. I told Nancy that I needed complete transparency from her going forward. This meant open access to her phone, email, and social media accounts. She agreed without hesitation, even offering to delete her social media altogether if it would help me trust her again. However, as the weeks went by, I found myself constantly checking Nancy's messages and emails. It was exhausting and made me feel terrible, but I couldn't stop. Every time Nancy's phone buzzed, I felt a pang of anxiety. Was it Edward? Some other man I didn't know about? This wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted, but I didn't know how else to rebuild trust. About 2 weeks ago, something happened that made everything even more complicated. I was going through some old boxes in our attic, still looking for that elusive college diploma, when I came across Nancy's old journals from college. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't resist reading them. What I found shook me all over again. In her journal entries from around the time we started dating, Nancy wrote about feeling torn between me and Edward. She described Edward as her true love and wondered if she was settling by choosing me. There were entries where she compared us, listing pros and cons. It was painful to read how uncertain she had been about our relationship in those early days. One entry, in particular, stood out to me. Nancy had written about a night when Edward had shown up at her dorm room, drunk and begging for another chance. She wrote about how tempted she was to take him back, how alive he made her feel. But she also wrote about me, describing me as safe and stable. She concluded the entry by saying she was choosing me because it was the smart choice, but that she would always wonder about Edward. Reading these words felt like a knife to my heart. All this time, I had thought I was Nancy's first choice, her true love. But now I wondered if I had just been the safe option, the reliable guy she settled for because Edward was too volatile. I confronted Nancy about the journals. She was upset that I had invaded her privacy, but tried to explain that those were just the confused thoughts of a young girl. She insisted that she chose me because she truly loved me, and that her feelings for Edward faded quickly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was her second choice, that she had settled for me because Edward didn't want a serious relationship. To make matters worse, I found out through a mutual friend that Edward had recently moved back to our city. He's single and has been reaching out to old friends, including some that Nancy and I still hang out with. I can't help but worry about them potentially reconnecting. When I asked Nancy if she'd had any contact with Edward since he moved back, she hesitated before saying no. But I caught a flicker of something in her eyes that made me doubt her. I hate feeling this way, constantly suspicious and uncertain. Our friends have started to notice that something's off between us. We've been avoiding social gatherings, making excuses to stay home. I'm afraid of running into Edward at a party or event. I'm also terrified of Nancy seeing him again and old feelings resurfacing. Last weekend, we ran into one of Nancy's old college friends at the farmer's market. The friend mentioned that there was talk of a college reunion next year. The thought of Nancy potentially seeing Edward at this reunion filled me with dread. When I brought it up later, Nancy got defensive, accusing me of not trusting her. But how can I, given everything that's happened? I'm trying to work on our relationship, but it feels like every step forward is followed by 2 steps back. Nancy has suggested we see a marriage counselor, but I'm hesitant. I'm not sure I want to air our dirty laundry to a stranger, and part of me worries that a counselor might try to minimize Nancy's betrayal or pressure me into forgiveness before I'm ready. I love Nancy, but I'm starting to wonder if love is enough. Can I ever fully trust her again? Am I always going to be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop? I don't know if I have it in me to live like this long term. I'm at a crossroads and don't know which way to turn. Part of me wants to fight for our marriage, to believe that the life we've built together is worth saving. But another part wonders if it's time to walk away, to give myself a chance at a relationship built on honesty from the start. As I write this, Nancy is downstairs making dinner. I can smell her vegetarian lasagna, my favorite dish. It's such a normal, domestic scene, but it feels like there's an ocean between us. I don't know how to bridge that gap, or if I even want to try. Any advice or perspectives would be greatly appreciated. How do you move forward when the past keeps pulling you back? Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update, and a lot has happened. I'm still struggling, but some things have become clearer. After my last post, I decided to take a more proactive approach. I told Nancy that I needed to know everything if we were going to have any chance of moving forward. I asked her to write down a complete timeline of her relationship with Edward, including any contact they'd had since we'd been together. Nancy was reluctant at first, but she agreed. What she wrote was more detailed and painful than I expected. She admitted that she and Edward had been in contact sporadically over the years, mostly through social media. They never met in person, but there were occasional flirty messages and reminiscing about old times. The most recent contact was just after Edward moved back to town. He had reached out to her on Facebook, asking to meet for coffee to catch up, Nancy said she declined, but she admitted to being tempted. This was the contact she had hesitated to tell me about before. Reading all of this was like a punch to the gut. Even though there hadn't been any physical cheating beyond the initial incident, the emotional connection Nancy maintained with Edward felt like a betrayal all over again. I confronted Nancy about why she kept in touch with Edward all these years. She broke down and admitted that part of her had always wondered, what if? She said she loved me and our life together, but Edward represented a road not taken, and she had a hard time letting go of that completely. This admission led to a huge fight. I felt like I'd been living in the shadow of Edward for our entire relationship without even knowing it. Nancy tried to explain that her feelings for Edward were just nostalgia, and that I was the one she truly loved and chose every day. But her words rang hollow after everything I'd learned. In the heat of the moment, I told Nancy I wanted a separation. The look of shock and hurt on her face almost made me take it back, but I knew I needed time and space to think clearly. I've been staying at a friend's place for the past 3 weeks. Being away from Nancy has given me some perspective. I've realized that while I still love her, I'm not sure I like the person she is anymore. The Nancy I fell in love with wouldn't have maintained a secret emotional connection with an ex for years. During this separation, I've been reflecting on our relationship and noticing things I had overlooked before. I remembered how Nancy would sometimes get defensive when I asked about her past, or how she'd change the subject when Edward's name came up in conversations with old college friends. At the time, I thought she was just trying to move on from a painful chapter in her life. Now, I wonder if she was hiding her lingering feelings for him. I've also been thinking about our future plans and how they've changed over the years. When we first got together, Nancy and I talked about joining the Peace Corps, about traveling the world and making a difference. Somewhere along the line, those dreams got scaled back. We settled for jobs at local nonprofits, bought a house in the suburbs. I always thought it was a natural part of growing up. But now I wonder if Nancy was holding back, keeping her options open in case Edward came back into the picture. Nancy has been calling and texting constantly, begging for another chance. She says she'll do anything to make things right. She's offered to cut off all contact with Edward and even suggested we move to a new city for a fresh start. She's talked about quitting her job and recommitting to our old dreams, joining the Peace Corps or starting that animal sanctuary we used to talk about. Part of me wants to believe her and try to salvage our marriage. We have a life together, a home, shared friends. The thought of starting over at 32 is terrifying, but a larger part feels like too much damage has been done. I'm not sure I can ever look at her the same way again. I've started individual counseling to help sort through my feelings. It's been helpful to have an objective perspective. My counselor has encouraged me to take my time making any big decisions and to focus on what I truly want, not just what I think I should do. For now, I'm focusing on healing myself. I've thrown myself into work, taking on a new project at the nonprofit that's challenging but rewarding. I've also started hitting the gym regularly and reconnecting with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. It feels good to have goals and relationships that are just for me, not tied to my relationship with Nancy. Last week, I ran into Edward at a local coffee shop. It was surreal, finally putting a face to the name that's caused so much turmoil in my life. We didn't speak, but he clearly recognized me. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, wondering if he ever thinks about the pain he's caused, if he even knows the full extent of it. I still don't know what the future holds for Nancy and me. Some days, I miss her terribly and want nothing more than to go home and try to work things out. Other days, the thought of reconciliation makes me feel physically ill. I'm trying to take it one day at a time and trust that the right path will become clear eventually. For now, I'm committed to being honest with myself about my feelings and needs. That's something I've realized I wasn't always doing in my marriage, too focused on being the perfect husband to acknowledge my own doubts and insecurities. Whatever happens with Nancy, I want to carry that lesson forward. I'm grateful for all the advice and support I've received here. It's been a comfort knowing I'm not alone in this struggle. I'll update again when I have more clarity on my next steps. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I've made some big decisions. After 3 months of separation, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy choice, but I realized that I couldn't move past the betrayal and years of deception. The trust was irreparably broken. Nancy didn't take the news well. She pleaded for another chance, promised to change, and even suggested we start over completely, New city, new jobs, everything. But I knew in my heart that it wouldn't solve the underlying issues. The divorce process has been difficult. Dividing up our life together is painful, and there are moments when I second-guess my decision. Deciding what to do with our house, the one we'd put so much work into making eco-friendly, was particularly tough. In the end, we decided to sell it and split the proceeds. Telling our friends and family about the divorce has been challenging. Most have been supportive, but some think I'm overreacting to ancient history. My brother Mark has been my rock through all of this, offering a spare room when I needed it and just listening when I needed to vent. I've had to distance myself from those who don't understand or respect my decision. It's been hard losing some friendships, but I've realized that true friends will support you even if they don't agree with your choices. Speaking of Edward, I found out through mutual friends that he and Nancy have been spending time together. Apparently, they ran into each other at a local coffee shop shortly after I moved out, and they've been reconnecting since then. While it hurts, it also confirms that I made the right decision. Their relationship, whether platonic or romantic, is no longer my concern. I've been focusing on rebuilding my life as a single person. I've moved into a new apartment in the city, closer to work, and to the kind of active, environmentally conscious lifestyle I've always wanted. I've taken up new hobbies, joined a rock climbing gym, and started taking cooking classes. It's been fun learning new skills and meeting new people. I've even started dating casually. It feels strange after being with Nancy for so long, but also exciting. I'm not looking for anything serious right now, just enjoying getting to know new people without the pressure of commitment. Work has been a great distraction. I've thrown myself into a new project at the nonprofit, working on a campaign to protect local wetlands. It's challenging and sometimes frustrating, but it feels good to be making a difference. I'm even considering going back to school for a master's in environmental science, something I'd always wanted to do, but had put off. Looking back, I can see red flags I missed in our relationship. Nancy always had a way of minimizing my feelings or turning situations around to make herself the victim. I realize now that this was a pattern throughout our marriage, not just with the Edward situation. I'm not angry anymore, just sad for what could have been. But I'm also hopeful for the future. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm being true to myself and my own needs. To anyone going through something similar, my advice would be to trust your gut. If something feels off in your relationship, it probably is. Don't ignore those feelings or let someone convince you that you're overreacting. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice throughout this journey. It's been a tough road, but I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel.